Alright, in this video we're going to work on solving equations involving square roots. So our first example we have x squared equals 36. So you want to get this x alone, so we have to do the opposite of squaring. And you might remember from algebra that the opposite of squaring is to square root. So if we square root both sides, basically what happens is the square root cancels out the square, leaving us with just x. So x equals, and then the square root of 36 is 6. Now some of you guys might remember, there's just one more thing we have to remember. Let's look at that answer. We said x is a 6, x squared equals 36, 36 equals 36, so that works out. But there is one more number that if you square it, you get that positive 36, and that is a negative 6. Negative 6 squared, because it's negative 6 times negative 6, is a positive 36, equal to the right side 36, so a negative 6 works as well. So what we do in math is we just say a positive and a negative 6, so x equals plus or minus 6. That's how we can show both of those solutions. Alright, example 2, we have x squared equals 40. We're trying to get the x alone, so we square root both sides. The square root cancels out the x squared, so x equals the square root of 40. Now 40 is not a perfect square, so we want to reduce this radical. So that reducing radicals we did in 9.1 day 1 is going to help us out. So we're trying to find the biggest perfect square that fits into 40. Start with 4, 9, 16, 25. 4 fits in 10 times. And how do you know that 4 is the biggest number? You look at the 10. Do any perfect squares fit into 10? And because none do, we know that we found the biggest one. So the square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 10 stays. So x equals 2 square roots of 10, but don't forget, it does get those two answers, plus or minus. All right, example 3. We have x squared equals negative 16, so again, you square root both sides. And then we're going to run into an issue right here. Do you see here how we're trying to square root a negative number? So if you look back on the left over here, when we're squaring 6, we got a positive 36. When we squared a negative number, you got a positive 36. So basically, anytime you square something, you'll get a positive answer. So it does not make sense that we would have squared the x and get a negative 16. So this is a no solution answer. You can't even do it. Alright, so here are a few more examples, just working on the same concept. Example 4, we have x squared equals 1/9, so square root both sides. Square root of x squared is x. And now we get to talk about how do you take the square root of a fraction. Well, if you have the square root of a fraction, you can break that apart. Go ahead and take the square root of the top number and the square root of the bottom number. The square root of 1 on top is 1. The square root of the 9 on the bottom is 3. And then remember, you always get those two answers, so that plus or minus does go in front of that 1/3. Alright, our next example, we've got the x squared right here, but now we've got a plus 9. So you know how we've been square rooting both sides? That's going to be, in this case, you want to get the x alone before you take the square root of it. So we will subtract 9 from both sides, trying to get that x squared alone, leaving us with x squared equals 16. Now we can square root both sides. Square root of x squared is x equals plus or minus, and then the square root of 16 is 4. All right, so this last one on this slide, we have this 8 squared and this 10 squared. So we want to go ahead and just simplify this equation a little bit. So what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and say, well, 8 squared is 64, 10 squared is 100. Now it's like example 5, and we can go ahead and solve this. We will subtract 64 from both sides, you want to get this x squared alone. So x squared equals 36. That's a 6. That looks nothing like a 6. Try that again. There we go, a little bit better. Now you can square root both sides. So x equals plus or minus 6. Alright, here are the last two examples for this video. It's getting a little bit more complicated, but we'll talk through it and make sense of it. We're starting out with this first one. We've got the square root of 11 squared. So up above, let me just show you what that means. That means the square root of 11 times the square root of 11. Well, anytime you're multiplying square roots, you can multiply them and keep your answer underneath the radical. So 11 times 11 is 121, but the square root of 121 is 11. So anytime you square a square root, you're always going to end up with what's underneath. So this just becomes an 11 plus. Now, if you take a square root of 7 and square it, you are going to get just a 7 equals x squared. We can go ahead and add those together. So we have 18 equals x squared. Now we're going to square root both sides because we got the x squared alone. Now the square root of 18 is not a perfect square, so we want to go ahead and reduce this. We want to think about what perfect square number fits in. So go through your list, 4, 9, 16, and we say, oh, 9 fits in 2 times. So this is 3 times the square root of 2 is equal to, and then this square root of x squared became an x. That's an equal sign. And then don't forget, it's easy to forget, but you guys are going to be good at remembering this, that plus or minus. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 2. All right, so this next one, look at this 2 square root of 3 squared. If we write that out, it's like saying this 2 times the square root of 3 times 2 square roots of 3. So if we were doing this the long way, we would say, well, let's go ahead and multiply the 2's together. 2 times 2 is 4. And then the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. And we would get 12. So what you can do is you can do that squaring in your head if you want to. You can say, all right, you have to take 2 and square it. 2 squared is 4. And then you have to take the square root of 3 and square it. And that just becomes a 3. Plus, now the square root of 8 squared becomes just 8 equals x squared. 4 times 3 is 12 plus 8 equals x squared. So we have 30 equals x squared. Square root both sides. Now look to see if you have any perfect square numbers that fit into 30. 4, 9, 16, 25. And then did you guys catch my mistake? Instead of 30, what should it be? 12 plus 8 is actually 20. Did you guys know that? I bet you all did. Alright, so we can break down a square root of 20. 4 fits in 5 times. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 5 stays, equals x. And then what's the one thing you want to remember with your answer? That plus or minus. Done.